Hey guys, welcome to the Centers course with Kim and Danielle. Danielle, take it over.
All right. Hey, everyone. Yeah, welcome. Hopefully you've already watched the strategy and authority courses. Hopefully you have your chart with you. As we start to dive into the mechanics and the understanding of how the centers operate, I want you to look at your centers and start to just bring it more grounded and practical to your own life. And like I said, hopefully you've already been practicing with your strategy and authority, because we're really going to start laying the foundation and the groundwork for what we call the not self. I did create another little video in here about conditioning and homogenization and what all that looks like. So we're really starting to redefine some terms here and all get on the same page with the languaging of the system, because human design is a very precise language, right? So we're going to start getting more familiar with that. So we're going to dive into all the centers and provide little videos for each one and what it looks like if you have it undefined or white, right? If it's not colored in, or defined. A lot of times when we look at our charts, we want to know about our definition, right? We gravitate towards all of that colored in stuff. We go, what is that? Because that is where we are fixed, right? The colored in stuff is fixed. It's not changing. It's who you are. This is your mechanics or your definition. The undefined or the white stuff is where you're receptive. And even if you have a lot of colored in centers, we're actually all mostly receptive beings. So I actually stayed up really late last night because I was having a lot of information come in, and I just contemplate this stuff all the time. And one of the things that I was really just getting a download about, or just understanding about, was distortion. So I want to talk about that first. Okay. So distortion in the world. Distortion in our lives, right? What is distortion? Distortion is basically where there's not clarity. It's like, what is that? There's no transparency. When we understand that human design provides us the framework for being completely comfortable in our skin, right? Relaxing into our life, letting our lives really unfold. Because the first lie when we come into this world is that we have to figure out our life mentally. There's all this pressure to, what am I going to do with my life, right? How do I figure this out? That's really the first and biggest lie that we have in the world. And that's where all this distortion comes from, is mentally trying to figure out our lives. So when we look at the undefined areas in our chart, we see that this is really the framework or the groundwork for what creates distortion or things that aren't clear in our life. So understand this on a personal level. If you are not speaking your full truth, your expression, if you are afraid to say something for whatever reason, we can look at this in the whole world too. This is why there's so many issues in the world. It creates distortion in that area of our life, right? We're not being clear. We're not being transparent. Think about when you don't communicate, or someone doesn't communicate clearly to you, and they're not being fully themselves, right? Now we have all these issues. So we want to start getting more comfortable, even in this discomfort of speaking our truth, being our authentic selves. And we're going to identify where we're holding ourselves back, and the strategies that our mind creates that, is why that happens, right? Because the mind is like, well, I'm going to do things this way. I'm not going to be fully authentic because of whatever the mind creates. So hopefully, like I said, you've already been experimenting with your strategy and authority. And if you have, you will see that this stuff works. And that's probably why you are here, because now there's interest, right? It's like, why does this work? This is so amazing. If you have not experimented with your strategy and authority, stop. Don't continue further with this. Go back to that other stuff first. And now we're going to start diving into each of the centers and looking at that. Conditioning, homogenization, the not self, all of these terms we're really going to start to understand on a deeper level, because that is what takes us away from who we actually are. As we get further and further into embodying our true selves, we'll get more comfortable with being in these situations where it's like, oh, well, maybe my ethics or my morals or the the conditioning, the societal programs, all of these things has made me believe that I can't be my full self because I'm self-sacrificing who I am in order to whatever that story is, right? So we're going to get rid of that.
Can
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
ask, yeah, while we're here? So I'm like kind of, as you were talking, thinking of distortion and using different words, and I just want to see if this is accurate. So whenever
Sure.
I'm relaying it, and it's just kind of like the distortion is the confusion because of the conflict. And the conflict is who I am compared to what other people are saying. So is that what you're saying? That it seems that embodiment of self, of true self, is where we get the clarity. And so when we've embodied who we truly are, then we no longer have the distortion of what someone else has said or told us or what we've experienced as what's supposed to be. Would you say that that's accurate?
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And distortion can come in so many different ways. And as we look through all the centers, we're going to see the themes and how life is set up and what distortion looks like in each of these areas of our lives. But yeah, it's confusion, but also it can show up as like when I think of distortion, it's illusion, right? It's not truth. It's like whatever story you're telling yourself or whatever you're believing or whatever.
Yeah, what came to me was when I was in confusion, it was, well, just tell me what to do. Like it's that. It's like it's asking another person to tell so that I can know or so that I can be clear. When the dissonance or the conflict or what you're calling distortion is dropping that and
Yes.
coming to know thyself.
The shapes are the centers, okay? And they carry a lot of information. They also correlate to physical stuff, right? Like biological organs and different themes. Some are places of awareness. There's only 3 places of awareness. We'll go through that as we go through the centers. Some are places of energy. Some are just pressure, and some are just purely mechanical. So we're going to start to see how everything is set up. So the white areas, again, these are like the undefined centers. The colored in areas are the defined centers. We've got channels, and the numbers are gates, and we'll go through more of that stuff later. But like I said, most of us, all of us really are purely more on a receptive to receiving life and how we're processing consciousness. So it is going to be a really fascinating look at what we're going through with the centers.
So my question is, for someone who is like more defined or fully defined, and you say that it's like that constant, they already have that constant, that not changing stuff. Can that be conditioned, or is that not going to be conditioned because it is what it is?
Well, it is interesting that you bring this up. The undefined areas, whether it's a center or even like these white areas of like channels or gates, things that we don't have as our definition, that's where we're receiving the information from others or planets or just life, that conditioning. It's really our source of wisdom, but where it shows up in the not self, meaning how the mind interprets the inconsistency of that information, and it creates a strategy to cope with it, to protect itself. The where it shows up in our life the most is actually in our colored in areas. So even though I'm undefined here, if I'm operating out of not self, meaning I'm not actually following my strategy and authority, because that's what it means, then it's going to show up in my
because
definition.
You're following the conditioning from the actual, like the gates and from the channels. Wow. Okay. So the centers are, this is who I am, this is not going to change, but the channels are affected, and then that's where we have that illusion and we try to make that mean something.
Yeah, and it's not just the channels, it's also my centers might not operate correctly. Those centers that correlate to a biological function, now I might have physical problems, right? So, but it's going to show up in my definition. You could have physical issues as well, though, in these undefined centers. Another thing that I need to mention here is that these are not chakras, okay? So a lot of times when people look at this, they're like, oh, it says the root center. Is that like the root chakra, right? So I'm going to do a 2 or 3 minute little understanding here about the difference, okay? As we can see in human design, there are 9 centers. It's important that we operate with all 9, meaning we understand where we are receiving And then we also operate with our definition through strategy and authority. But basically, we are in a vehicle that is a 9-centered vehicle. It's not hierarchical. Like, you don't have to work on your root to get your sacral activated, to get your solar plexus. It's not that hierarchical old chakra system that really was in effect prior to 1781. We are in a different vehicle operating in a different medium of life, a different time frame, a different cycle, which we'll probably be going more into understanding the cycles of time and evolution of being human later on. And we can use human design to understand that, but it is not chakras. It does not relate really in that way. Human design, as a little caveat here, is a culmination of parts of many systems. So it does draw from the Brahman chakra system as one of the components, but it's not that in isolation. So practice your strategy and authority. If you want to eliminate resistance in your life, you do that. And now we're going to look at the centers individually and start to be able to have awareness of how the mind draws us into different places that are not correct for us, and how to really alchemize or transmute, how to convert that information that we would normally use to self-destruct into something that is of wisdom, because really the white areas are where you meet the world, right? This is where you meet the other. This is where you have awareness on a deeper level where you're not limited. So it's actually something that's very beautiful, and you can learn a lot through your life just knowing this. And the colored in areas, you don't really have to do anything. You don't have to try to be your definition. That's not how it works. If you operate in your strategy and authority and you're watching the mind do its little thing, but you're not listening to it fully like that, then your mechanics, just like your heartbeat beats without you thinking about it, your mechanics operate without you having to do anything. And then you get to discover who you are. And that's really how this process works. So